At my wife's funeral, in the stillness filled only with sobs and whispered condolences, my son pulled me aside. He didn't speak of loss. He spoke of money. "Give me the inheritance or else," he said through clenched teeth. Instead of getting angry, I quietly handed him an old envelope, and that was only the beginning of my plan. Justice must be served, and arrogance must be punished. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, if you believe integrity is the ultimate strength, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. He thought he had won. When my son, Leo, snatched the envelope from my hand at his own mother's funeral, I saw in his eyes a wild glint of triumph. He saw a fragile, grieving old man, and in his hand, he held what he believed was the key to an empire. He thought that within that old, yellowed paper lay the legal documents, the account numbers, the swift and easy pass to a life he felt he was entitled to. He was so blinded by avarice, he couldn't see the truth. He didn't know. He couldn't have known that it wasn't a gift. It was a test, a final painful test orchestrated by the woman who had given him everything, Eleanor, my wife. To understand my actions that day, to comprehend the chilling calm of a father facing his son's greed, you have to travel back with me. Back to a time when the name Eleanor and Arthur wasn't a multi-million-dollar brand printed on gleaming office buildings, but just a promise scribbled on a napkin in a small, forgotten roadside diner. Back when our wealth was not measured in dollars, but in shared dreams and unwavering trust. Eleanor was the fire, a brilliant, intelligent flame that never knew fear, that saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. She had a genius for business, an almost supernatural ability to see opportunities where others saw only hopeless walls. And I was the quiet earth that contained that fire, giving it the foundation to burn brightly without consuming itself. I saw the numbers behind her magnificent opportunities. I was an accountant by trade, a man who believed in the immutable order of a ledger, in the irrefutable truth of a balance sheet. We were different in every way, yet we were two perfect pieces of a whole. Together we built our small consulting firm from nothing. I can still feel the ghost of those long nights, sitting at our rickety old kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of invoices and endless cups of cold coffee. Eleanor, eyes blazing with passion, would sketch out audacious strategies on legal pads, ideas that could reshape entire industries. And I, with my sharpened pencils and meticulous ledgers, would turn those soaring dreams into tangible numbers, into viable financial plans. We mortgaged our tiny house not once, but twice. We lived on ramen noodles and cheap casseroles for months on end, celebrating a paid invoice with a shared chocolate bar. But we never felt poor. We were rich in purpose, rich in our absolute faith in each other. Then Leo was born, a tiny, red-faced miracle who arrived with a cry that echoed with all the promise of the future. His arrival changed our world forever. It was a time when the company was on the verge of taking off. The seeds we had planted were finally beginning to sprout. Big contracts started coming in, and with them, the demands for Eleanor's time became relentless. The business trips became more frequent, the phone calls later into the night. She was the face and the mind of the company, and her presence was non-negotiable. I saw the toll it was taking on her. The exhaustion behind her victorious smile after every late-night flight. The conflict in her eyes as she stood by Leo's crib, wanting to stay but knowing a conference call in another time zone awaited. And I looked at Leo's innocent face, needing the stability and presence of a parent. It was then that I made a choice, a quiet decision that would alter the course of all our lives. I remember a rainy night. She had just returned from a brutal week of negotiations in Chicago. She looked utterly drained, but her eyes were alight with the thrill of the deal she had just closed. "You're sacrificing too much, Arthur," she said, her voice soft with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. her hand running through my hair as we stood in the doorway of Leo's room watching him sleep soundly in his crib. Your career, your own ambitions. This is an investment, Eleanor, not a sacrifice, I replied, and I believed every word with all my heart. You build our empire, I'll build our family. We each have our part to play. One cannot stand without the other. And so I did. I gracefully stepped back from the career I had been building. I turned down lucrative offers to become a partner at a prestigious firm. I became a full-time father, a silent manager of the home front. My world became school runs, parent-teacher conferences, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. I wanted Leo to grow up with the unwavering presence of a father. I wanted to create a sanctuary of stability and love at home, a safe harbor that would allow Eleanor's brilliant ship to sail freely into the storm of the business world, without her ever having to worry about the cold winds at her back. That was the greatest and most noble mistake of my life. It was a decision born of pure love, but it planted the seeds of a tragedy I could never have foreseen. The company didn't just grow. It exploded. Our wealth multiplied exponentially, and Leo, our son, grew up in a world where the word no was an abstract concept, a word spoken to other people, but never to him. His first sports car on his 16th birthday was not a gift of love, but an appeasement for his mother's absence. His penthouse apartment overlooking the city when he went to college was not a tool for independence, but a golden cage. His automatic promotion to a vice president position right after graduation without a single day of real-world experience was not an opportunity, but a curse. Eleanor, I believe, was driven by a deep, unspoken guilt. The guilt of a mother who was building an empire but missing her son's school plays. She compensated for her absence with material things, showering him with a lifestyle that we, his parents, had only dreamed of after decades of relentless work. She wanted to give him everything, but in doing so, she forgot to give him the one thing that mattered, the challenge to earn it for himself. I tried. God knows, I tried. As Leo grew from a boy into a young man, I saw the dangerous seeds of entitlement taking root, and I did everything I could to show him a different path. I tried to teach him the value of labor, the quiet dignity of a day's hard work. I would take him to the local community garden where I volunteered, hoping he would feel the satisfaction of nurturing something from the soil. He would just complain about the dirt on his $1,000 sneakers. I tried to teach him about humility. I took him to the soup kitchen where I helped serve meals on weekends, hoping he would see the reality of the world beyond our gilded cage. He looked at the faces of the hungry and the desperate not with compassion, but with a detached, almost clinical curiosity, as if he were observing a different species. He couldn't understand that the line between their reality and his was simply a matter of circumstance, a line his mother and I had fought tooth and nail to cross. In Leo's eyes, my values were relics of a bygone era. My quiet life, my simple pleasures, my belief in character over currency, these were not virtues to him, but weaknesses. He admired his mother, the titan of industry, the warrior who conquered boardrooms. He looked down on his father, the soldier, who had voluntarily laid down his arms. He never understood that it was the silent sacrifice of that soldier that had supplied the entire war effort. He saw my contentment not as peace, but as a lack of ambition. He saw my integrity not as a strength, but as a foolish obstacle in a world where the only rule was to win. The divide between us grew slowly at first, then with a terrifying speed. It was a chasm carved out by differing values and widened by wealth. Our conversations became strained, like two people speaking different languages. I would talk about the importance of community, and he would talk about market share. I would talk about personal responsibility, and he would talk about leveraging assets. He began to see me not as his father, but as an outdated piece of software in his otherwise perfectly optimized life. Eleanor, caught between her soaring career and her deep-seated guilt, was often an unwilling mediator in our silent war. She saw what was happening, but she felt powerless to stop it. "He's just ambitious, Arthur," she would say, though her voice lacked conviction. "He's living in a different world than we did. It's more competitive now." "It's not ambition, Eleanor," I would reply gently. "It's arrogance. We taught him how to spend money, but we never taught him how to earn respect." The first time I truly felt the sting of his contempt was on his 21st birthday. We were at a lavish restaurant, the kind with more forks than I knew what to do with. Eleanor had just gifted him a brand new luxury sedan, the keys resting casually next to his champagne flute. I had brought him something different. It was my own father's vintage watch, a simple, elegant timepiece that had been passed down through 3 generations. It wasn't expensive, but it was steeped in history, in the legacy of good, hard-working men. I presented it to him in its worn leather box. "This was your great-grandfather's," I said. "He was a watchmaker. He built this with his own hands." Leo opened the box, glanced at the watch for a fraction of a second, and gave a polite, empty smile. "Thanks, Dad. It's classic." He then turned his attention back to his new car keys, revving an imaginary engine. Later that evening, I saw the watch abandoned on a side table, forgotten. It was more than an oversight. It was a rejection. A rejection of his history, of his heritage, and of me. As the years went on, his visits became less frequent, his phone calls shorter. He had joined the company, of course, in a position created just for him. He had his mother's name and my analytical mind, a potent combination that, without the grounding of humility, became a dangerous weapon. He made risky deals, driven by ego rather than sound strategy. He treated long-time, loyal employees with a dismissive arrogance, seeing them as cogs in a machine rather than the human beings who had helped build his mother's empire. I would hear whispers from old friends still at the company, stories of Leo's tantrums, his lavish spending on corporate accounts, his disregard for the company culture Eleanor and I had so carefully built. I tried to talk to Eleanor about it, but the subject of Leo had become a minefield in our marriage. It was the one topic that could bring a chill to the warmest room. She couldn't bear to see the flaws in the son she had tried to perfect with money. Admitting his failures would be admitting her own. So I watched from the sidelines, a silent, heartbroken spectator, as my son transformed into a man I no longer recognized. He was a stranger with my wife's ambition and my facial features, but with a hollowness at his core that terrified me. Then, Eleanor fell ill. The diagnosis was a brutal, merciless verdict. It wasn't a swift battle, but a long, grueling siege. The illness stripped away her strength, her independence, her fiery spirit, but it could not touch her brilliant mind. For the last 3 years of her life, my world shrank to the 4 walls of our bedroom. My life became a meticulously managed schedule of medications, doctor's appointments, and quiet moments of shared memory. It was in those quiet moments that the real Eleanor, the woman I had fallen in love with in that diner so long ago, returned. The business titan faded away, and in her place was the woman who loved old movies and debated the endings of novels. The weight of her empire lifted, and she spoke not of profits and losses, but of regrets. Chief among them was Leo. "I failed him, Arthur," she confessed one night, her voice barely a whisper, her hand frail in mine. "I thought I was giving him the world, but I just gave him a cage made of gold. I protected him from every struggle, and in doing so, I robbed him of the chance to build his own strength. I held her, my own heart aching with a truth I had known for years. We both made mistakes," I said. "We did what we thought was best." During those 3 years, Leo's presence was a fleeting, almost ghostly thing. He was always closing a deal, in a crucial meeting, or handling a crisis. He would send extravagant bouquets of flowers that filled the room with a cloying, funereal scent, but he rarely sent himself. His visits were brief, impatient, punctuated by the glow of his smartphone screen as he checked emails and stock prices. He spoke to his dying mother about quarterly reports and market trends, completely oblivious to the silent plea in her eyes for a moment of simple, human connection. He didn't see what I saw. He didn't see the woman who had built an empire now, struggling to lift a glass of water. He didn't see the fear that flickered in her eyes in the dead of night. He saw only a delay, an inconvenience holding him back from what he truly wanted: control. He thought I knew nothing of his activities at the company. He thought his old father, lost in the fog of grief and caregiving, was completely out of touch. He didn't know that I, the old accountant, could still read a financial report with deadly accuracy. I knew his important projects were reckless gambles that were bleeding the company dry. I knew his major contracts were ill-conceived ventures that were alienating our most valuable clients. He wasn't building on his mother's legacy, he was setting it on fire. And Eleanor knew too. I saw it in her eyes whenever he left the room, a profound and bottomless disappointment. But she was too tired to fight, too pained to confront the son she had created. And I, out of a desperate love for her, honored her silent wish. I didn't want her final days to be consumed by the ugliness of his greed. I absorbed the reports, the whispers, the painful truth, and I shouldered that burden alone, creating a fragile peace for her in the eye of the storm. The end came on an April afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting a golden glow on the room that had become our entire world. There was no dramatic climax, just a quiet fading, a gentle exhale. I was holding her hand, just as I had every day for 3 years. Her breathing, which had been a labored struggle, suddenly became calm, peaceful. She opened her eyes, and for a moment they were clear and bright, the way I remembered them from the day we met. She looked directly at me, and in that gaze I saw everything: love, gratitude, regret, and a strength that even her illness could not extinguish. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice a mere thread of sound, but it was filled with an astonishing clarity. "He is not ready. He will destroy it all." My heart clenched. I knew exactly who and what she was talking about. "Don't worry about that now," I murmured, stroking her hair. "Just rest." "No," she insisted, a flicker of her old fire returning. She gestured weakly toward the old oak dresser in the corner of the room, the one piece of furniture we had brought with us from our very first home. "In the bottom drawer, there is an envelope. I prepared it a long time ago." I had seen that envelope before. It was thick and made of heavy cream-colored parchment, sealed not with glue, but with a wax stamp bearing her initial, E. I always assumed it contained personal letters, memories she wanted to keep private. Her eyes held mine, conveying a plea, a final command. "Give it to Leo when you think the time is right," she said, each word an effort. "When he truly needs an answer, not when he wants a check. You will know the moment. Promise me, Arthur. Trust your instincts." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "And promise me one more thing," she continued, her grip on my hand surprisingly strong. "Protect our legacy. Our legacy isn't the money, Arthur. It's the integrity. It's the idea that you can build something great without losing your soul. Don't let him destroy that." "I promise," I whispered, and the word felt like a sacred vow, sealed in the quiet holiness of that room. She smiled, a faint, beautiful smile that erased all the lines of pain from her face. And then she was gone. The days that followed were a blur of hollow arrangements and empty condolences. Leo flew in, of course, playing the part of the grieving son with an actor's precision. He stood by the coffin, accepted sympathies, and even managed to shed a few convincing tears. But his eyes were restless, constantly scanning the room, assessing the attendees not as fellow mourners, but as business contacts. His grief was a performance. His true focus was on the inheritance that he believed was now his for the taking. And that brings us back to that moment at the funeral, the moment that set everything in motion. When he cornered me, hissing his demand for the inheritance, he wasn't just being impatient, he was revealing his true nature. He saw his mother's death not as a tragedy, but as a transaction. He saw me not as his grieving father, but as an obstacle, a gatekeeper to his prize. So I gave him the envelope. It wasn't an act of surrender. It was the first move in a game he didn't even know he was playing. It was me, honoring my promise to Eleanor. I was giving him the chance, one last, slim chance, to confront the truth on his own, to find a path toward redemption through his mother's final words. But in the weeks that followed, I came to realize a painful truth. A man who has never had to work for anything will never value the wisdom that comes from struggle. The envelope remained unopened. I knew because I had asked him. He saw it as a sentimental trifle, a collection of his mother's feelings, which had no monetary value and were therefore worthless to him. He was waiting for the lawyers, for the official reading of the will, for the cold, hard numbers. His calls to me became a regular feature of my lonely days. They were never to ask how I was coping. They were interrogations. "Dad, the lawyers still haven't called. What's the holdup? Did you file the death certificate?" His voice was always sharp with an undercurrent of accusation, as if I were deliberately slowing down the process. "The lawyers will call when they are ready, Leo," I would say, my voice a calm monotone. "Everything your mother left for you is in that envelope. Have you opened it?" "It's just some emotional stuff, Dad," he would scoff. "I need the legal documents. I have plans, deals to make. I can't have my assets tied up in probate for months." His assets. He already saw it all as his. Meanwhile, I began to act, not out of revenge, but out of a sense of duty to my promise. I was not a CEO, but I was the man who understood the financial soul of this company better than anyone alive. I went to the office, not as a new leader, but as a quiet observer. I pored over the books, my old skills returning to me like a forgotten language. The numbers on the pages told a horrifying story. They spoke of Leo's recklessness, of his vanity, projects that had drained millions, of the toxic debt he had accumulated behind his mother's back. He wasn't just spending the profits, he was mortgaging the company's future. I met with the old guard, the handful of loyal executives who had been with us since the beginning. I saw the worry in their eyes. They had been trying to warn Eleanor, but she had been too ill, and Leo had systematically pushed them out of his inner circle, replacing them with sycophants and yes-men. They welcomed me, not as a savior, but as a last hope. The pressure on Leo was mounting from all sides. The bills for his extravagant lifestyle were coming due. The creditors for his failed side projects were getting impatient. He grew more desperate, his calls more aggressive. "Dad, I know you're hiding something. You're trying to cut me out, aren't you? You were always jealous of Mom's success, and now you're trying to steal it." To hear those words, after everything I had sacrificed, it was a wound deeper than grief. But I held my tongue. I simply replied, "The answer is in the envelope, Leo." He never opened it. Instead, he made his final, fatal move. He decided that, if he couldn't get the empire through inheritance, he would seize it by force. He chose to destroy the one thing he couldn't control, me. The turning point did not arrive with a thunderous crash, but with the quiet, unassuming rustle of an envelope being pushed under my apartment door. It was a crisp, formal letter, the kind that feels heavy with consequence before you even open it. The letterhead was from a prestigious downtown law firm, one I didn't recognize. My heart, which had felt so heavy with grief for weeks, suddenly felt cold with dread. The letter was a formal notice. It informed me that a petition had been filed with the county court. The petitioner was my son, Leo Flores. The subject was me, Arthur Flores. And the purpose of the petition was to request an emergency hearing for a temporary conservatorship over my person and my estate. I read the words again, and then a third time, but they wouldn't change. Conservatorship. It was a legal term I knew. From my accounting days, a mechanism designed to protect those who could no longer protect themselves, the elderly, the infirm, the mentally incapacitated. It was a tool of care. But in Leo's hands, it had been twisted into a weapon. Attached to the notice was a sworn declaration, signed by Leo. My hands trembled as I read his words, his cold, calculated lies presented as loving concern. He wrote of my deep and persistent grief, my increasing confusion, and my erratic behavior since Eleanor's passing. He cited my quiet withdrawal from social life not as mourning, but as evidence of cognitive decline. He mentioned my repeated, calm insistence that he open the envelope, not as a father's guidance, but as a sign of my obsessive fixation and inability to grasp complex financial matters. He was painting a picture of me as a broken old man, lost in sorrow, clinging to sentimental trifles while the great machinery of his mother's empire was grinding to a halt. He argued that my refusal to cooperate in the swift transfer of assets was jeopardizing the company and the livelihoods of its hundreds of employees. He wasn't just trying to get the money. He was trying to erase me, to legally declare me a non-person, a ghost to be managed by a court-appointed guardian who would, of course, be him. But the final, most venomous part of the declaration was the inclusion of a supporting statement from a Dr. Alastair Finch, a psychiatrist I had never met. Dr. Finch attested, based on second-hand observations provided by Mr. Leo Flores, that my behavior was consistent with the onset of age-related dementia, exacerbated by severe emotional trauma. He strongly recommended an immediate psychiatric evaluation and the appointment of a conservator to prevent me from causing harm to myself or my financial interests. It was a perfectly constructed legal trap. He was using my grief, my quiet, dignity, my very love for his mother as weapons against me. He had found a doctor willing to bend the rules, to make a diagnosis without ever having laid eyes on me. He was attempting a hostile takeover, not just of the company, but of my very identity. That was the moment I knew, the chance I had given him, the quiet hope I had held that he would find his own way to the truth, was a fool's hope. My promise to Eleanor was not to stand by passively while our son set fire to everything we had ever stood for. My promise was to protect our legacy, and our legacy was integrity. I walked over to the old oak dresser, the one piece of furniture that held the deepest memories of Eleanor. My hand did not shake as I reached into the bottom drawer. There were 2 envelopes there. The first was the one I had given Leo, the test. The second was thicker, heavier, sealed with the same wax E. On the front, in Eleanor's elegant script, were the words, "For Arthur, to be opened only when there is no other choice." There was no other choice. I broke the seal. Inside was not a letter, but a collection of documents, each one a testament to Eleanor's foresight, to her deep, if flawed, understanding of the son she had created. The first was a detailed, notarized journal she had kept during the last year of her life. In it, she documented every one of Leo's missed visits, every business trip he took while she was in pain, every conversation where he pressured her about her will. She wrote about her fears, her disappointment, and her growing realization that she had raised a son who valued currency more than character. The second document was a full psychological evaluation of her own. It had been conducted by a renowned specialist just 6 months before she passed. The conclusion was unequivocal. Eleanor Flores was of exceptionally sound mind, lucid, and under no undue influence. She had anticipated that Leo would challenge her final wishes by claiming she was not competent, and she had built an unbreachable defense against that very attack. But it was the third document that was the true masterstroke. It was the last, will and testament of Eleanor Flores. The real one. I sat there for a long time, the document spread across my small kitchen table like a battle plan. The grief that had been a constant, heavy shroud for weeks began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear anger. It was not the hot, reckless anger of a wounded man. It was the focused, precise anger of an accountant who had just found a critical error in the ledger of life, an error that had to be corrected. Leo had made a fatal miscalculation. He had assumed he was playing a game against a grieving, confused old man. He had no idea he was playing a game against his mother, a grandmaster who had seen all his moves from the very beginning and had set the board for this exact endgame years ago. And she had chosen me to be her final, decisive piece. Looked at the real will. It was a masterpiece of legal and emotional clarity. The preamble spoke of her deep and abiding love for me, reaffirming the partnership that had built their empire. She acknowledged her role in shaping Leo, her regrets, her hopes that he might one day find his own path. Then came the stipulations, each one a perfectly aimed shot at Leo's greed. The company, Flores Consulting Solutions, and its entire portfolio of assets, valued at over $34 million, were to be placed into a trust. The trust had one purpose: to continue the philanthropic work Eleanor had started in her later years, funding scholarships, supporting local arts, and investing in ethical startups. The document was airtight, naming specific charities and outlining a clear mission. And the sole trustee, the person with absolute and unquestionable authority over the entire $34 million estate, was me. Leo's inheritance was a separate, conditional bequest. He was to receive the family home on Hillcrest Avenue and a sum of $500,000. But it came with a clause, a beautiful, devastating clause that only Eleanor could have written. The inheritance was contingent upon him successfully managing a small, independent division of the company for a period of 2 years, a division that focused solely on nonprofit consulting. He would receive a modest salary, no expense account, and his performance would be judged not on profit, but on social impact. He had to earn his inheritance by proving he could serve others, not just himself. He had to learn the value of work. It was a brilliant, compassionate, and utterly ruthless move. She hadn't disinherited him. She had given him a challenge, a path to redemption. But it was a path she knew he would never willingly take. My path, however, was now crystal clear. The court hearing for the conservatorship was scheduled in 1 week. 1 week to dismantle the web of lies Leo had so carefully woven. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was to an old friend. Frank Patterson was the head of the IT department at Flores Consulting. He was a quiet, unassuming man who had been with us since the beginning, a man whose loyalty was to Eleanor and the company she built, not to the reckless boy who now occupied her office. "Frank," I said when he answered, my voice steady, "It's Arthur Flores. I need your help, and I need you to be discreet." There was no hesitation in his voice. "Anything for you and Eleanor, Arthur. What do you need?" "I need access," I said. "I need to see every email Leo has sent, every file he has accessed, every financial transaction he has authorized for the past year." "Consider it done," he replied. Within an hour, a secure link appeared in my email inbox. It was a digital window into Leo's soul, and what I saw was uglier than I could have imagined. I saw emails between him and Dr. Finch, the psychiatrist. It wasn't just a case of second-hand observations. Leo had paid him a consulting fee of $50,000. Disguised as a corporate expense, had been transferred to Dr. Finch's private firm just 2 days after Eleanor's funeral. It was bribery, plain and simple, a conspiracy to commit fraud. I found the original draft of the conservatorship petition on Leo's computer. It was even more damning. In his initial notes, he had written, "Father is stubborn but sharp. Must emphasize. Emotional instability. Use the grief angle. The envelope is key. Portray it as a delusion." He knew I wasn't incompetent. He was manufacturing a lie, a narrative designed to strip me of my rights. I worked through the night, fueled by black coffee, and a righteous fury I hadn't felt in decades. My old accounting skills, dormant for so long, came roaring back to life. I traced every dollar, followed every paper trail. I compiled a dossier, a meticulous, undeniable record of his deceit. I had the emails. I had the financial records. I had the proof of his conspiracy. But Eleanor's plan was more profound than just exposing a crime. It was about teaching a lesson in character. My next step was to find the heart of her legacy. The philanthropic trust was not just a legal entity. It was a collection of people, of causes she had cared about deeply. The will listed the board of advisors she had secretly appointed to guide me. Among them was a name that made me pause. Dr. Annabelle Lee, head of the neuropsychology department at the State University, and the very specialist who had conducted Eleanor's final competency evaluation. Eleanor had not just built a defense, she had laid a trap. My meeting with Dr. Annabelle Lee was not what I expected. I had anticipated a formal clinical discussion. Instead, I found a woman in her late 60s with kind, intelligent eyes who spoke of Eleanor not as a client, but as a friend. Eleanor was one of the most brilliant minds I've ever encountered, Dr. Lee told me, sitting in her university office, surrounded by books and academic journals. She was also deeply troubled by her son. She came to me a year ago, not because she doubted her own sanity, but because she predicted Leo would one day try to weaponize that very concept against anyone who stood in his way. She confirmed everything. She had the original signed copy of Eleanor's evaluation, a testament to her sharp, strategic mind. But she gave me something more. "Eleanor spoke about you at length, Arthur," Dr. Lee said, her expression softening. "She called you her moral compass. She said you were the only person she knew who could wield immense power without being corrupted by it. That's why she entrusted you with her legacy. She knew you wouldn't use it for revenge, but for restoration, her words were a balm to my wounded soul. Eleanor hadn't just left me a fortune. She had left me her faith." Dr. Lee agreed to testify at the hearing, not just as a medical expert, but as a character witness to Eleanor's final, clear-minded intentions. She was the first pillar of my defense. The next pillar came from an unexpected place. The will had named the other members of the Trust's advisory board. One was a respected judge, another was a beloved community leader, and the third was a man named Marcus Thorne, the CEO of our company's biggest and most respected competitor. I was stunned. Marcus Thorne had been Eleanor's fiercest rival for over 20 years. Their battles in the boardroom were legendary. Why? Would she appoint him to advise me? I called him, expecting a curt dismissal. Instead, I was met with a deep, respectful voice. "Arthur," Marcus said, "I've been waiting for your call. Eleanor spoke to me a few months before she passed. She made me promise I would help you if the time came." "But you were her rival," I stammered. He chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. "Rivals, yes, but we were never enemies. There was a respect between us, the kind that only comes from battling a worthy opponent. She knew I understood the industry better than anyone, and she knew I valued integrity above all else. She said she was afraid her son was turning her company into something she no longer recognized. She asked me to help you guide it back. Marcus Thorne, the man Leo had spent years trying to imitate and undermine, was now my ally. He had access to industry reports, market analyses, and a reputation that was beyond reproach. He would be my second pillar. The final days leading up to the hearing were a blur of methodical preparation. I did not hire a high-powered law firm. I represented myself. This was not a legal battle to be won by technicalities. It was a moral battle to be won by the truth. I organized my evidence into a simple, devastating narrative. I had Leo's emails to the psychiatrist, a clear case of bribery and conspiracy. I had the financial reports, a stark testament to his incompetence and greed. I had the real will, a legal document that superseded his entire claim. And I had my witnesses, a world-renowned psychiatrist, a titan of industry, and the loyal employees who had watched their company being torn apart. The night before the hearing, I stood in my quiet apartment, looking at the photo of Eleanor on my nightstand. The weight of the moment settled upon me. I was not just fighting for myself. I was fighting for her, for the promise I had made, for the legacy of a woman who had, in her final act, tried to correct the one great mistake of her life. I thought about Leo. I felt a pang of sorrow for the lost little boy I had once known. The boy who had become so consumed by the shadow of his mother's success that he had lost himself. But the sorrow was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. Eleanor had given him a path to redemption, and he had spat on it. He had chosen the path of deceit and destruction. Now, he would have to walk it to its inevitable end. I put on my best suit, the one I had worn to Eleanor's funeral. It felt different, now. It was no longer the attire of a mourner, but the armor of a man going into battle. As I walked towards the courthouse the next morning, the city air crisp and cool, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer the quiet, grieving husband. I was no longer the invisible, retired father. I was Arthur Flores, the sole trustee of the Eleanor Flores Trust, the protector of her legacy, and the instrument of her final, brilliant plan. I saw Leo as I entered the courtroom. He was standing with his lawyer, looking confident, smug. He saw me walk in alone, and a small, condescending smile played on his lips. He thought he was looking at a lamb walking to the slaughter. He had no idea. He was looking at the shepherd. The courtroom was a sterile, impersonal space, all polished wood and muted colors, designed to strip emotion away and leave only the cold, hard framework of the law. Leo and his lawyer sat at one table, a picture of polished confidence. They looked at me, sitting alone at the opposing table with an air of dismissive pity. To them, I was a foregone conclusion, a procedural step on their path to victory. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, entered, and the proceedings began. Leo's lawyer, a man with a slick smile and an expensive suit, stood first. He painted a masterful, tragic picture for the court. He spoke of a brilliant woman, a titan of industry, tragically lost. He spoke of her devoted son, Leo, trying to honor her legacy while grappling with his own immense grief. And then he spoke of me. He portrayed me as a man shattered by loss, a loving husband so consumed by sorrow that he had become detached from reality. He presented my quiet dignity as confusion, my methodical nature as obsession. He spoke of the company, a great ship, needing a firm hand at the helm, a hand that I, in my fragile emotional state, could no longer provide. He presented Leo's petition for conservatorship not as an act of greed, but as an act of love, a painful but necessary step to protect me from myself and to save the empire his mother had built. It was a beautiful, compelling, and utterly false narrative. When he finished, Judge Miller looked at me with a softened, sympathetic expression. "Mr. Flores," she said, her voice gentle, "I've read your son's petition and the supporting declaration from Dr. Finch. These are serious concerns. Do you have legal representation?" "I do not, Your Honor," I replied, my voice clear and steady, echoing slightly in the quiet room. "I will be representing myself." A murmur went through the small public gallery. I saw Leo lean over and whisper something to his lawyer, who smirked. This was even better than they had hoped. The confused old man was going to try and play lawyer. "That is your right, Mr. Flores," the judge said, a hint of caution in her tone. "But I must advise you, these are complex matters. Are you sure you wish to proceed without counsel?" "I am perfectly sure, Your Honor," I said, "because this is not a complex matter. It is, in fact, very simple. It is a matter of truth versus fiction." I stood and walked to the podium, carrying a single, slim folder. I could feel Leo's eyes on me, burning with a mixture of annoyance and amusement. "Your Honor," I began, "my son's petition rests on 3 fundamental claims: that my mental state is compromised, that I am mismanaging the estate, and that his actions are motivated by a desire to protect his mother's legacy. I intend to disprove all 3 claims with simple, verifiable evidence." Leo's lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Flores is not a medical expert. He cannot testify to his own mental state." "I don't intend to," I replied calmly before the judge could rule. "Instead, I would like to call my first witness." The judge looked surprised. "You have a witness list?" "I do, Your Honor. My first witness is Dr. Annabelle Lee." The name landed in the courtroom like a thunderclap. Dr. Annabelle Lee was not just any psychiatrist. She was the head of the State University's neuropsychology department, a figure whose reputation was unimpeachable. I saw Leo's lawyer's smile falter. He quickly shuffled through his papers. Dr. Lee was not on his list. He was completely unprepared for her. As Dr. Lee was sworn in, I saw a flicker of real fear in Leo's eyes for the first time. I approached the witness stand. "Dr. Lee," I began, "could you please state your relationship with the deceased, Mrs. Eleanor Flores?" Eleanor was a patient, a research patron, and over the last few years, a dear friend, Dr. Lee stated, her voice calm and authoritative. "And in your professional capacity, did you have occasion to evaluate Mrs. Flores's mental state in the final year of her life?" "I did," she said. "At her own request. I conducted a full competency evaluation 6 months before she passed. It was one of the most thorough evaluations I have ever performed." "And what was your conclusion, Doctor?" Dr. Lee looked directly at the judge. "My conclusion, Your Honor, was that Eleanor Flores was one of the sharpest, most lucid, and mentally sound individuals I have ever had the privilege of evaluating. Her cognitive functions were exceptional, and she was under absolutely no undue influence." She presented her full 50-page report to the court as evidence. The foundation of Leo's argument that his mother had been vulnerable to my manipulation had just been obliterated by an unimpeachable expert. But I wasn't finished. "Dr. Lee," I continued, "Eleanor spoke to you about her son, did she not?" Leo's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, hearsay, patient confidentiality." "Overruled," the judge said, her eyes now fixed on Dr. Lee with intense interest. "The witness may answer." "Yes," Dr. Lee said. She expressed deep concern. She feared that Leo's sense of entitlement and his lack of understanding of the company's core values would lead him to make reckless decisions after her passing. She predicted, in fact, that he might one day attempt to have anyone who stood in his way declared incompetent. The courtroom was silent. I had not only proven Eleanor's sanity, I had shown her foresight. I had shown that this moment, this very hearing, was a trap she had helped me set. I thanked Dr. Lee, and she stepped down, leaving a palpable sense of shock in her wake. The judge's expression was no longer sympathetic. It was sharp, focused. The narrative of the frail, confused old man was beginning to crumble. "Now, Your Honor," I continued, turning to the second claim, "that I am mismanaging the estate. My son has portrayed me as an obstacle, someone preventing the smooth operation of Flores Consulting. He claims I am a man who doesn't understand business. On that, he is partially correct. I am not a businessman. I am an accountant. And as an accountant, I believe in one thing above all else: the numbers do not lie. I placed my slim folder on the projector. The first document that appeared on the screen was not a complex financial spreadsheet. It was a simple email. This is an email from my son, Leo Flores, to Dr. Alistair Finch, dated 2 days after my wife's funeral. In it, he authorizes a consulting fee of $50,000 to be paid from a corporate account. I then projected the corresponding bank transfer. The money had been paid. Dr. Finch, of course, is the psychiatrist who provided the sworn declaration of my incompetence, despite never having met me. My son will claim this is a legitimate business expense. I, the accountant, call it what it is, a bribe. Leo's lawyer was on his feet, shouting objections, but it was too late. The evidence was on the screen for the judge to see. The conspiracy was laid bare. My son claims his petition is motivated by a desire to protect his mother's legacy, I said, my voice rising with a controlled passion. So let us examine how he has protected that legacy for the past year, while his mother was fighting for her life. The screen changed. It was now a series of financial charts, stark and brutal in their clarity. This, I said, pointing to a sharply declining red line, is the company's profit margin over the last 12 months. And these, I said, highlighting a series of massive expenditures, are the reasons why. I walked the court through it, deal by disastrous deal, the Bali project, a $2 million loss disguised as a luxury resort development, the Dubai venture, a $5 million sinkhole based on the advice of a known charlatan. I presented the internal reports, the ignored warnings from senior staff, the expense accounts filled with 5-star hotels and private jet charters. I was no longer just a grieving husband. I was Arthur Flores, the man who knew where every single dollar was buried. I spoke the language of numbers, a language of pure, unassailable fact. I wasn't attacking my son. I was simply reading the ledger of his failures. Leo sat frozen in his chair, his face ashen. The members of the board he had brought with him were looking at him with horror. They were not just seeing a failed businessman, they were seeing a fool who had been exposed, a child who had been caught playing with his mother's life's work. This, Your Honor, I said, my voice ringing with the full weight of my conviction, is not a man trying to protect a legacy. This is a man who has been actively setting it on fire. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Then I delivered the final decisive blow. My son has demanded his inheritance. He has built this entire case on the assumption that he is the rightful heir to his mother's empire. But he made one critical mistake. In his rush to declare me incompetent, he never bothered to do the one thing my wife asked of him. He never opened the envelope. I turned to Leo, my eyes locking with his for the first time. You were so certain of what you deserved, you never stopped to read what your mother actually wanted. With the judge's permission, I presented the final document. Not the real will. That was for a different time, a different battle. This was something far more personal. It was the letter from the first envelope, the test. Your Honor, I said, this is a letter written by Eleanor Flores to our son. She asked me to give it to him after her passing. The judge took the letter. She read it silently, her expression unreadable. After a long moment, she looked up, first at Leo, then at me. Mr. Flores, she said to Leo, her voice now stripped of all warmth, this court is not a tool to be used for family disputes or corporate takeovers. The petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice. Furthermore, based on the evidence of financial misconduct and potential conspiracy to commit fraud presented here today, I am referring this entire matter to the district attorney's office for a full investigation. The gavel struck the wood with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. It was over. I saw Leo's face crumble, the mask of arrogant confidence shattering to reveal the terrified, lost boy underneath. His lawyer was already packing his briefcase, abandoning his client like a sinking ship. As the court emptied, I stood alone for a moment. I hadn't felt a sense of victory, only a profound and heavy sadness. But as I turned to leave, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Marcus Thorne, Eleanor's old rival. He had been sitting silently in the back of the courtroom the entire time. He looked at me with an expression of deep, hard-won respect. "She would have been proud of you, Arthur," he said. "You didn't just win a case. You honored her." And in that moment, I knew he was right. I walked out of that courthouse not as a victor, but as a survivor. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face, and for the first time in 3 long years, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The weight I had carried, the weight of Eleanor's illness, of my grief, of Leo's betrayal, had at last been lifted. Justice, I realized, wasn't a loud, triumphant victory. It was the quiet, profound sense of order being restored to the universe. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The news of the hearing, of Leo's failed legal coup and the impending investigation, spread through the business community like wildfire. His carefully constructed world of privilege and entitlement collapsed overnight. The friends who had flocked to his side, drawn by the promise of his inheritance, vanished. The board members he had appointed resigned in disgrace. He was left with nothing but the consequences of his own actions. He was never formally charged. I made a choice. In a private meeting with the district attorney, I presented the full picture, not just of Leo's crimes, but of Eleanor's final wishes. I showed them the clause in her will, the one that offered him a path to redemption through work and service. I argued that the public humiliation and the loss of his inheritance were a far more fitting punishment than a prison sentence. It was not an act of mercy for Leo, but an act of honor for Eleanor. I would not allow her legacy to be further tarnished by the scandal of her son's incarceration. They agreed to suspend the investigation in exchange for Leo leaving the state and relinquishing any and all future claims to the estate. He took the deal. I saw him one last time, a week after the hearing. He came to my apartment, a shadow of the arrogant man who had confronted me at the funeral. He was diminished, hollowed out. He didn't apologize. I don't think he was capable of it. He just handed me a key to the Hillcrest house, the one part of his inheritance he was allowed to keep but could no longer afford. "I'm selling it," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I'm moving to California." "I hope you find what you're looking for, Leo," I said, and I meant it. "What is it you think I'm looking for?" he asked, a flicker of his old sarcasm returning. "A second chance," I replied. "Your mother left you one. I hope you don't waste it." He left without another word, and I have not seen or heard from him since. With the legal battles behind me, I turned my full attention to my new, unexpected role. I was the trustee of a $34 million philanthropic foundation. It was a daunting responsibility, but for the first time since I retired, I felt a sense of purpose. I was no longer just the keeper of Eleanor's memory. I was the executor of her final, greatest ambition. I assembled the advisory board she had chosen. Together, with the guidance of Dr. Lee and the surprising, steadfast support of Marcus Thorne, we began to put Eleanor's vision into practice. We funded scholarships for bright, underprivileged students who reminded me of a young Eleanor. We revived the local arts programs that had been gutted by budget cuts. We invested in small, ethical businesses run by people with more passion than capital. I did not move back into the big house on Hillcrest. It was full of too many ghosts. I sold it and added the proceeds to the trust. I stayed in my small, simple apartment, a place that felt like my own. My life did not become one of luxury. It became one of service. One day, while going through some of Eleanor's old files at the office, I found a small locked box. Inside was not a business document, but a collection of old napkins from roadside diners, each one covered in her familiar, energetic handwriting. They were from the earliest days of our marriage, filled with her wildest ideas, her most audacious dreams. Tucked at the bottom was the very first one, the one from the day we met. On the back, in my own neat, careful script, was a single calculation, the simple math that proved her crazy idea could actually work. I sat there in her quiet office, holding that fragile piece of history, and I finally understood. Eleanor's real will was not the legal document filed with the court. It was this. It was the belief that a good idea, backed by integrity and hard work, could change the world. She had lost her way for a time, seduced by the allure of wealth and status. But in the end, she had returned to the simple truth we had started with. She hadn't left me money to manage. She had left me a mission to complete. The envelope I had given Leo, the one he had never opened, I finally retrieved it from his abandoned room. I opened it myself. Inside, there was no complex test. There was just a single yellowed photograph of the three of us, taken on a camping trip years ago. We were smiling, happy, a family. On the back, Eleanor had written, "This was my real fortune. I hope you find yours." I placed that photo on my desk next to the old napkin. My life was quiet now, but it was not empty. It was filled with purpose, with the honor of carrying on her true legacy. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true power isn't about controlling an empire, but about having the integrity to build something that lasts, and that the greatest inheritance isn't money, but the wisdom to know what truly matters. If this story resonated with you, let us know by liking this video and sharing it with someone who believes that character is the only currency that never loses its value. And please, subscribe for more stories of justice and integrity. Thank you for watching.